introduction, I give you Rabbi Brenner Glickman.
Thank you, Judith. Friends, as Jews, we are so blessed, and thank God that we were born Jews or found Judaism, and because the gifts of our tradition and our heritage just keep on giving and giving. And this is one more example. In addition to our magnificent Torah and moral and religious instruction and our cultural heritage and our foods and our holidays and our community, everything that we love about being Jewish, one more aspect, which is an extraordinary culture. And within that culture, an amazing body of literature. And within that literature, this particular element, which is Yiddish short fiction. Although not all of our stories were originally written in Yiddish, all of them, by the way, are going to be in English, so just wanted to clarify that right away. But some of our stories in the course, most of the stories were written in Yiddish, but all of them come from the great era of Jewish short fiction, which was primarily Yiddish, and also carried into America. Well, or specifically New York, but that these stories are so brilliant, so insightful, so clever, heartfelt, tragic, hysterically funny, that they are just the brightest jewels, just the most sparkling gems, not just of our tradition, but of the products of humanity, and have been recognized as such by Nobel Prize committees and other judges of fine literature, and we can claim them as our own. But some of them have been resting with some cobwebs and a little bit of dust. Maybe the cobwebs and dust of our own minds. We might be encountering stories today or in the weeks ahead that in fact you have read, but you may have read them 40 years ago, and who can remember? And to read them anew is its own joy. To come and appreciate them again, maybe at a different life stage or with different company. So our program is 4 sessions, each session 2 stories. And we are going to be reading the stories and then having some time for discussion, and then read the next story with some time for discussion. That is the format of this program. Each of you will receive, at the start of each session, printed copies of the program. In addition, you will get them by email, especially if you're attending on the live stream. You will get them by email, it'll go out to everyone who registers for the class. So if you're here today and haven't registered, or if you are attending on live stream and haven't registered, make sure to register, because then you get the emails between the classes that tell you what's coming next, or remind you, and also will send you the stories on a PDF that you can, have it at home to print or just for yourself. Please keep in mind that all of the stories that we're handing out, though many of these are copyrighted material, even though the stories may be over 100 years old in many cases, the translations are not. And so we feel comfortable buying the books and then printing them to use in a class setting. But if you like this, we usually give the citation of where this story is printed. Go ahead and buy the book, order it on Amazon, or come to our Temple Emanu-El library and browse the amazing collection and find more. So maybe this will be an end unto itself, but also maybe an opening if you find an author you hadn't known before or are curious about, or a collection that something's pulling from, you're thinking, I would love to read more like this. And I promise you, everything that we're going to be doing, there will be more like this. So sadly, I only had 8 stories when there are hundreds of brilliant stories, and some of the greatest writers of our people, are getting 1 story, so they had others. You can read them. Let's go ahead and begin. Today's program, and in fact, much of the stories from of these 4 sessions, are going to focus on the era of what's called the Yiddish Renaissance, and this would be the second half of the late 19th century, so the late 1800s and into the early 1900s was the era of what we call the Yiddish Renaissance or Yiddish literature Renaissance. The 3 great pioneers that really established Yiddish literature as a respected body of literature were first Mendele Mochas Forum, and then right behind, slightly younger, were Sholom Aleichem and Peretz. And we're going to be featuring 2 of them today, Sholom Aleichem and Peretz. These 3 established a culture of Yiddish literature where no one had written and published in a meaningful way before these 3 did in Yiddish. Yiddish was called a kitchen language. It was a jargon, but you wouldn't write fine literature in that language, and these 3 established the precedent that others would follow. And they sought, because they were literate in the great Russian literature and Polish literature and Italian literature, and they were well read in many languages. They wanted to have something of our own that rivaled anyone else, and not only did they achieve that kind of parity, but in many ways surpassed. So, friends, let us begin now with our first writer. I'm going to introduce today Sholom Aleichem. Perhaps you've heard of him. Of our 8 stories, he's the only one who will have authored 2 of them. So we'll give him a little bit of a bigger introduction because we're going to hear one of his stories today and another one next week. Sholom Aleichem, as you know, is a pen name. He was born Shalom Rabinowitz. Born in 1859, he died in 1916. In fact, both of our writers today were born just a few years apart and died 1 year apart, so they're perfectly concurrent. Sholom Aleichem, in his lifetime and since, was universally adored. By Zionists and anti-Zionists and Bundists and socialists and Marxists who were they all loved Sholom Aleichem. In fact, so absolutely loved and admired, and our people were proud of him. One thing to keep in mind, and here there's occasionally a misconception about who he was as a person. He was definitely not Tevye. Tevye was a country shtetl bumpkin, and while Sholom Aleichem may have been born in a shtetl life he left it fast and was very sophisticated, modern, urban, polyglot. He lived in Kiev, socialized with the cultural elite, and pointedly taught Russian and spoke Russian in the house for his children to grow up as Russian speakers. He married into a wealthy family, and that enabled him to dedicate his life to writing, but not only for himself personally, but be the first to publish Jewish Yiddish writers in journals that he funded with the money of his wife's family, and brought to the attention of the Jewish world many other writers of his generation, including, most famously, Peretz, who would actually surpass him in publishing, but Peretz can thank Sholom Aleichem for his start, because Peretz didn't have any money, and so he wasn't going to get published if it weren't for Sholom Aleichem. Sholom Aleichem, his writings are adored for reasons, like anybody who's enjoyed Fiddler on the Roof, or others, Tevye the Milkman and those stories, love him. He's funny, he's playful, he's tender, human, clever, witty, but also at the same time, he addresses our deepest fears, our terrors, our anxieties, especially of his moment in zeitgeist, which was an age of change and uncertainty, and he nailed it. Sholom Aleichem, perhaps, well, this may be true of all writers, but especially of him, was famous for his mask, for shielding his own identity or disguising it. So, we'll start with his name. Sholom Aleichem was a pen name, and when he used it, people didn't know who he was. In fact, Peretz, our other reader today, wrote letters to Sholom Aleichem, and the first few letters he wrote to him, he thought he was someone else. He thought he was actually Mendele Mochasforim, the other. He thought that was, he didn't know who had taken on this pen name. So there's that he hid behind a false name, but also that he hid behind this persona. Sholom Aleichem himself is a character in many of his stories. This writer, this well-known writer, who became, just like so many actors today are in TV series about their life, but it's like a fictionalized account of their lives, where they're over the top crazy, or they're, it's like they're themselves but slightly different. Sholom Aleichem put himself in the stories, and so he's a character, so you don't know if he's real or not. And in his stories, very often, including today's story, he pretends that he didn't write these stories, that they were just given to him or told to him by someone else. So he creates this sort of facade, this mask, that I'm not him, and he isn't me, and I didn't write this. Like it's all this strange charade as a writer with his audience. And of course, his most famous mask is the mask of comedy when he's writing tragedy. The Greeks carefully divided those two genres. Sholom Aleichem famously smushed them. And we will see that this week, but most especially next week. Today, we are reading On Account of a Hat. Did I hear you say absent-minded? Now, in our town, that is, in Kisrilivka, we've really got someone for you. Do you hear what I say? His name is Sholom Shachna, but we call him Sholom Shachna Rattlebrain. And is he absent-minded? Is this a distracted creature? Lord, have mercy on us. The stories they tell about him, about this Sholom Shachna, bushels and baskets of stories, I tell you, whole crates full of stories and anecdotes. It's too bad you're in such a hurry on account of the Passover. Because what I could tell you, Mr. Sholom Aleichem, do you hear what I say? You could go on writing it down forever. But if you can spare a moment, I'll tell you a story what happened to Sholom Shachna on a Passover Eve. A story about a hat. A true story. I should live so, even if it does not sound like someone made it up. Even if it does sound like someone made it up. These were the words of a Kizrilivka merchant, a dealer in stationery, that is to say, snips of paper. He smoothed out his beard, folded it down under his neck, and went on smoking his thin little cigarettes, one after another. I must confess that this true story, which he related to me, does indeed sound like a concocted one. And for a long time, I couldn't make up my mind whether or not I should pass it on to you. But I thought it over and decided that if a respectable merchant and dignitary at Kizrilivka, who deals in stationery and surely is no literateur, if he vouches for a story, it must be true. What would he be doing with fiction? Here it is, in his own words, I had nothing to do with it. This Sholom Shachna I'm telling you about, who we call Sholom Shachna Rattlebrain, is a real estate broker. You hear what I say? He's always with landowners negotiating transactions. Transactions? Well, at least he hangs out around landowners. So what's the point? I'll tell you. Since he hangs around the landed gentry, naturally some of their manner is rubbed off on him. And he always has a mouth full of farms, homesteads, plots, acreage, soil, threshing machines, renovations, woods, timber, and other such terms having to do with estates. One day, God took pity on Sholom Shachna, and for the first time in his career as a real estate broker, are you listening? He actually worked out a deal. That is to say, the work itself, as you can imagine, was done by others. And when the time came to collect the fee, the big rattler turned out not to be Sholom Shachna Rattlebrain, but Drubkin, a Jew from Minsk province, a great big fearsome rattler, a real estate broker from way back. He and his two brothers, also brokers and also big rattlers. So you can take my word for it, there was quite a to-do. A Jew has contrived and connived and has finally, with God's help, managed to cut himself in. So what do? But come along and cut him out. Where's justice? Sholom Shachna wouldn't stand for it. Are you listening to me? He set up such a holler and an outcry. Look what they've done to me. That at last they gave in to shut him up. And good riddance it was, too. When he got his few cents, Sholom Shachna sent the greater part of it home to his wife so she could pay off some debts, shoo the wolf from the door, fix up new outfits for the children, and make ready, skip that, for the Passover holidays. And as for himself, he also needed a few things, and besides, he had to buy presents for his family, as was the custom. Meanwhile, the time flew by, and before he knew it, it was almost Passover. So Sholom Shachna, now listen to this, ran to the telegraph office and sent home a wire. Arriving home Passover without fail. It's easy to say arriving, and without fail at that. But you just try it. Just try riding out our way on the new train and see how fast you'll arrive. Ah, what a pleasure. Did they do us a favor, I tell you, Mr. Sholom Aleichem? For a taste of paradise such as this, you gladly forsake your own grandchildren. You see how it is? Until you get to Zolodievka, there isn't much you can do about it. So you just lean back and ride. But at Zolodievka, the fun begins. Because that's where you have to change to get onto a new train, which they did us such a favor by running out to Kizrilivka. But not so fast. First, there's the little matter of several hours' wait, exactly as announced in the schedule provided. Of course, Oh, provided, of course, that you don't pull in after the Kizrilivka train has left. And at what time of night may you look forward to this treat? The very middle. Thank you. When you're dead tired and disgusted, without a friend in the world except sleep, and there's not one single place in the whole station where you can lay your head, not one. When the wise men at Kizrilivka quote the passage from the holy book, Tov Shem B'Shem and Tov, they know what they're doing. I'll translate it for you. We were better off without the train. To make a long story short, when our Sholom Shachna arrived in Zolodyevka with his carpet bag, he was half dead. He had already spent 2 nights without sleep, but that was nothing at all to what was facing him. He still had to spend the whole night waiting in the station. What shall he do? Naturally, he looked around for a place to sit down. Whoever heard of such a thing? Nowhere, nothing, no place to sit. The walls of the station were covered with soot, the floor was covered with spit. It was dark, it was terrible. He finally discovered one miserable spot on a bench where he had just room enough to squeeze in, and no more than that, because the bench was occupied by an official of some sort in a uniform full of buttons, who was lying there all stretched out and snoring away to beat the band. Who this Buttons was, whether he was coming or going, he had the vaguest idea. Sholom Shachna, that is. But he could tell that Buttons was no dime a dozen official. That was plain by his cap, a military cap with a red band and a visor. He could have been an officer or a police official, who knows? But surely he had drawn up to the station with a ringing of bells, had staggered in full to ears with meat and drink, laid himself out on the bench as in his father's vineyard, and worked up a glorious snoring. It's not such a bad life to be a Gentile, an official one at that, with buttons, thinks he. Sholom Shachna, that is. And he wonders, dare he sit next to this Buttons, or hadn't he better keep his distance? Nowadays, you can never tell whom you're sitting next to. If he's no more than a plain inspector, that's still all right. But what if he turns out to be a district inspector, or a provincial commander, or even higher than that? And suppose this is even Perishkevich himself, the famous anti-Semite, may his name perish. Let someone else deal with him. Sholom Shachna turns cold at the mere thought of falling into such a fellow's hands. But then he says to himself, now listen to this, Buttons. He says, who the hell is Buttons? And who gives a hang for Perishkevich? Don't I pay my fare the same as Perishkevich? So why should he have all the comforts of life and I none? If Buttons is entitled to a delicious night's sleep, then doesn't he, Sholom Shachna, that Liz, at least have a nap coming? After all, he's human too, and besides, he's already gone 2 nights without a wink, and so he sits down on a corner of the bench and leans his head back, not, God forbid, to sleep, but just like that, to snooze. But all of a sudden he remembers, he's supposed to be home for Passover, and tomorrow is Passover Eve. What if, God have mercy, he should fall asleep and miss his train? But that's why he's got a Jewish head on his shoulders. Are you listening to me? So he figures out the answer to that one too, Sholom Shachna, that is, and goes looking for the porter, a certain Yeremai. He knows him well, to make a deal with him. Whereas he, Sholom Shachna, is already in his 3rd sleepless night and is afraid, God forbid, he may miss the train. Therefore, let him, Yeremai that is, in God's name, be sure to wake him, Sholom Shachna, because tomorrow night is a holiday, Passover. Easter, he says to him in Russian, and lays a coin in Yeremai's mitt. Easter, Yeremai, do you understand, Goy Shakab? Our Easter. The peasant pockets the coin, no doubt about that, and promises to wake him at the first sign of the train. He can sleep soundly and put his mind at rest. So Sholom Shachna sits down in the corner of the bench gingerly, pressed up against the wall. with his carpetbag curled around him so that no one should steal it. Little by little, he sinks back, makes himself comfortable, half shuts his eyes. No more than 40 winks, you understand. But before long, he's got one foot propped up on the bench and then the other. He stretches out and drifts off to sleep. Sleep? I'll say sleep, like God commanded us, with his head thrown back and his hat rolling away on the floor. Sholom Shachna is snoring like an 8-day wonder. After all, a human being up 2 nights in a row, what would you have him do? He had a strange dream. He tells himself, that is, Sholom Shachna does. He tells this himself. He dreamt that he was riding home for Passover. Are you listening to me? But not on the train, in a wagon, driven by a thievish peasant, Ivan's Lodi, we call him. The horses were terribly slow. They barely dragged along. Sholom Shachna was impatient, and he poked the peasant between the shoulders and cried, "May you only drop dead, Ivan darling. Hurry up, you lout. Passover's coming, our Jewish Easter." Once he called out to him, twice, 3 times. The thief paid him no mind. But all of a sudden, he whipped his horses to a gallop, and they were whirling away, up hill and down like demons. Sholom Shachna lost his hat. Another minute of this, and he would have lost God knows what. "Whoa there, Ivan, old boy, where's the fire? Not so fast," cried Sholom Shachna. He covered his head with his hands. He was worried, you see, over his lost hat. How can he drive into town bareheaded? But for all the good it did him, he could have been hollering at a post. Ivan the thief was racing the horses as if 40 devils were after him. All of a sudden, they came to a dead stop, right in the middle of the field, you hear me? A dead stop. "What's the matter?" "Nothing." "Get up," said Ivan. "Time to get up." "Time? What time?" Sholom Shachna is all confused. He wakes up, rubs his eyes, and is all set to step out of the wagon when he realizes he has lost his hat. Is he dreaming or not? And what's he doing here? Sholom Shachna finally comes to his senses and recognizes the peasant. This isn't Ivan's Lodi at all, but Yeremai the porter. So he concludes that he isn't on the high road after all, but in the station at Zolodievka, and on the way home for Passover, and that if he means to get there, he better run to the window for a ticket, but fast. Now what? No hat. The carpet bag is right where he left it, but where is his hat? He pokes around under the bench, reaches all over until he comes up with a hat. Not his own, to be sure, but the official's, with the red band and the visor. But Sholom Shachna has no time for details, and he rushes off to buy a ticket. The ticket window is jammed. Everybody and his cousin are crowding in. Sholom Shachna thinks he won't get to the window in time, perish the thought, and he starts pushing forward, carpetbag and all. The people see the red band and the visor, and they make way for him. "Where to, Your Excellency?" asks the ticket agent. "What's this excellency?" all of a sudden wonders Sholom Shachna, and he rather resents it. Some joke, a Gentile poking fun at a Jew. All the same, Sholom Shachna, that is. Kisrilivka. "Which class, Your Excellency?" The ticket agent is looking straight at the red band and the visor. Sholom Shachna is angrier than ever. "I'll give him an excellency, so he'll know how to make fun of a poor Jew." But then he thinks, "Oh well, we Jews are in diaspora. Do you hear what I say? Let it pass." And he asks for a ticket, 3rd class. "Which class?" The agent blinks at him, very much surprised. This time Sholom Shachna gets good and sore, and he really tells him off. "3rd, says he. "All right," thinks the agent, 3rd is 3rd. In short, Sholom Shachna buys his ticket, takes up his carpetbag, runs onto the platform, plunges into the crowd of Jews and Gentiles, no comparison intended, and goes looking for the 3rd class carriage. Again, the red band and the visor work like a charm. Everyone makes way for the official. Sholom Shachna is wondering, what goes on here? But he runs along the platform till he meets a conductor carrying a lantern. Is this third class? Asks Sholom Shachna, putting one foot on the stairs and shoving his bag into the door of the compartment. Yes, Your Excellency, says the conductor, but he holds him back. If you please, sir, it's packed full, as tight as your fist. You couldn't squeeze a needle into that crowd. And he takes Sholom Shachna's carpet bag, you hear what I'm saying? And sings out, right this way, Your Excellency, I'll find you a seat. What the devil, cries Sholom Shachna. Your Excellency, Your Excellency. But he hasn't much time for the fine points. He's worried about his carpet bag. He's afraid, you see, that with all these excellencies, he'll be swindled out of his belongings. So he runs after the conductor with the lantern and leads him to second-class carriage. But it's also packed to the rafters, no room for even to yawn in there. This way, please, Your Excellency. And again, the conductor grabs the bag and Sholom Shachna lights out after him. Where in the blazes is he taking me? Sholom Shachna is racking his brains over this excellency business. But meanwhile, he keeps his eye on the main thing, the carpet bag. They enter the first-class carriage. The conductor sets down the bag, salutes, and backs away bowing. Sholom Shachna bows right back, and there he is, alone at last. Left alone in the carriage, Sholom Shachna looks around to get his bearings. You hear what I say? He has no idea why these honors have suddenly been heaped upon him. First class, salutes, Your Excellency. Can it be on account of the real estate deal he just closed? That's it. But wait a minute. If his own people, Jews that is, honored him for this, it would be understandable. But Gentiles, the conductor, the ticket agent, what's it to them? Maybe he's dreaming. Sholom Shachna rubs his forehead, and while he's passing down the corridor, glances into the mirror on the wall. It nearly knocks him over. He sees not himself, but the official with the red band. That's who it is. All my bad dreams on Yeremai's head and on his hands and feet that lug. 20 times I tell him to wake me, and I even give him a tip. And what does he do, that dumb ox? May he catch cholera in the face. But wake the official instead. And me he leaves asleep on the bench. Tough luck, Sholom Shachna, old boy, but this year you'll spend Passover in Zolodievka, not at home. Now get a load of this. Sholom Shachna scoops up his carpet bag and rushes off once more, right back to the station where he is sleeping on the bench. He's going to wake himself up before the locomotive, God forbid, lets out a blast and blasts his Passover to pieces. And so it was. No sooner had Sholom Shachna leapt out of the carriage with his carpet bag than the locomotive did let go with a blast. Do you hear me? One followed by another, and then good night. The paper dealer smiled as he lit a fresh cigarette, thin as a straw. And would you like to hear the rest of the story? The rest isn't so nice. On account of being such a rattlebrain, our dizzy Sholom Shachna had a miserable Passover, spending both Seders among strangers in the house of a Jew in Zolodievka. But this was nothing. Listen to what happened afterward. First of all, he has a wife, Sholom Shachna, that is, and his wife, how shall I describe her to you? I have a wife. You have a wife. We all have wives. We've had a taste of paradise. We know what it means to be married. All I can say about Sholom Shachna's wife is that she's a number one. And did she give him a royal welcome? Did she lay into him? Mind you, she didn't complain about his spending the holiday away from home. And she said nothing about the red band and the visor. She let that stand for the time being. She'd take it up with him later. The only thing she complained about was the telegram. And not so much the telegram, you hear what I say, as the one short phrase, without fail. What possessed him to put that into the wire? Arriving home Passover without fail. Was he trying to make the telegraph company rich? And besides, how dare a human being say without fail in the first place? It did him no good to answer and explain. She buried him alive. Oh, well, that's what wives are for. And not that she was altogether wrong after all. She had been waiting so anxiously. But this was nothing compared with what he caught from the town. Kisrilivka, that is. Even before he returned, the whole town, you hear what I said? Knew all about Yeremai, and the official, and the red band, and the visor, and the conductor's Your Excellency, the whole show. He himself, Sholom Shachna, that is, denied everything, and swore up and down that the Kisrilivka smart Alex had invented the entire story for lack of anything better to do. It was all very simple. The reason he came home late after the holidays was they had made a special trip to inspect the wooded estate. Woods? Estate? Not a chance. No one bought that. They pointed him out in the streets, held their sides laughing, and everybody asked him, how does it feel, Reb Sholom Shachna, to wear a cap with a red band and a visor? And tell us, said others, what's it like to travel first class? As for the children, this was made to order for them. You hear what I say? Wherever he went, they trooped after him, shouting, Your Excellency, Your Excellent Excellency, Your Most Excellent Excellency. You think it's so easy to put one over on Kisrilivka? Friends, this is our first story on account of a hat by Sholom Aleichem. Let's take a moment just to sort of absorb it in our thoughts and our reflections before we start hearing the impressions and the insights or questions of others. So just a moment of silence. Okay, I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see you. And now, let us go ahead and open the floor for comments, for insights, or questions on this, our first of 8 stories.
So first of all, I was charmed by the way he wrote the story. Do you hear what I'm saying? Are you listening? Interjected in all those ways. And the poor jerk. I mean, this poor Shlomo. No matter what he did it wrong. Couldn't get it right.
Yes. So 2 points. The style of it in spoken language. You hear what I'm saying? It's a dialogue between the narrator, who's the chain-smoking stationery salesman, and Sholom Aleichem, or us. But it's written as, as in spoken language, as if, this guy's talking throughout. You hear what I'm saying? And also to punctuate so you catch the important moments. You hear what I'm saying? He needed to take a nap, so you catch, the telegram. You hear what I'm saying? You want to make sure you heard the special elements that are going to come up later in the story. And then, of course, yes, this poor guy. But that's, the fact that he's a shlemazel is interesting given his profession and, and what that says too. So we're going to get back to that second comment. Yes?
He actually is also a shlemiel.
Mhm.
A shlemiel being a person who just doesn't get it right because he just doesn't know how, and he's a bit out of his league.
Yes. So we're actually getting a Yiddish corrective here between shlemiel and shlemazel. Now, Leo Rostin famously made the distinction between a shlemiel and a shlemazel. Shlemiel, it spills his entire bowl of soup, and the shlemazel is the one it lands on. And the distinction is this: a shlemiel, they're both unfortunate people that you're sympathetic, you pity them. You don't despise them. They're endearing terms that you're putting down, but they're endearing. But the shlemazel, it's not his fault. Like the shlemazel, she can't do anything right. Like bad things happen to her. But the shlemiel makes his or her own bad luck. The shlemiel, is a bumbler and a bungler and messes everything up as an active participant in the folly. And that's who this guy is. Our hero, our anti-hero, our main character is a shlemiel.
But
Yes.
It seems the story about not very much.
Yes, it seems, but is it not about very much is the question. So it seems like this bizarre farce. It's an absurdist tale. I mean, the premise makes no sense. The premise is patently absurd, that he thinks he's someone else and goes to wake himself up in this half-dreamy state of not fully awake. It's a farce. But, and here is why Sholom Aleichem permeates so deeply, it's more than a farce. It seems like it's a silliness, but there's something going on underneath. And the more it sits with you, the longer it can haunt. Let's go with Jay, and then please tell me your name.
Ronnie.
Ronnie? Okay, Jay, then Ronnie.
Seems that he had a little problem with a real estate deal,
Yes.
but regardless of what he did wrong, things turned out right. Because he ended up in first class. He also ended up being called Your Excellency. So regardless of who he was, fate seemed to take over and make him a lucky person.
Right, it almost worked great.
Almost.
Like he got to the ticket window and he got to like everything was going his way until he blew it, which just adds, of course, to the drama and the humor. Yes.
So I think Shalom Aleichem was saying how sad it was that his self-esteem is so low that he doesn't even recognize himself, that his expectation is, how could that be me? And the sadness of it.
Yeah, so let's get to that. Clearly, one of the essential themes of the story is about identity. And the Jews going through this time right now, the late 1800s was a period where Jews didn't quite know our place. We were in times accepted, and then there would be periods of pogrom and periods of restriction. Were we of the world? So some Jews were taking part in universalist movements, Marxism, socialism, communism, and were arm in arm with their fellow Ukrainians or their fellow Russians and for these greater causes. And some Jews were living still very separate lives, and there's this sort of in-between foot in both worlds, which is going to be a big part of Peretz's themes, which we'll get to with our second story, about sort of the awakening of the Jew into the modern world. But Sholom Aleichem, and especially the Tevye stories, is all about, think of Fiddler on the Roof. It's about the breaking of the tradition. It's about leaving the old world and entering to the new world, and what is it? Who are we, and what, and are we this or are we that? Sholom Aleichem is completely captivated by this theme that permeates so much of his writing, but none perhaps more blatantly than this case, where this Jew is venturing into a world that's not ours, real estate. And he's in train stations where Jews and Gentiles intermix uncomfortably. By the way, that's a big part of like Dubois' writing of the American Black experience, the peril of public transportation, because you're all of a sudden in close quarters and all of the bad things that happen and the terror that Black people felt riding on a train, or especially because you didn't know what the protocol is in that situation if you're sitting across from or next to. This is captured that same sentiment of what's our place and who am I? Like the sense that he confuses he doesn't know who he is because he's an in-betweener. Yes.
I felt like the red hat and the third and first class was a parable. That is, the Jew is third class.
Mm-hmm.
The red hat, the officer, His Excellency, first class a goy. And that, for me, was what the story was about, the juxtaposition. The difference in class.
Yeah.
Would that be?
Oh no, he was class conscious, and while he was not a blatant Marxist, Sholom Aleichem, he was anti-capitalist. And this story is anti-capitalist in some of these components, where he is mocking the one capitalist in the story, who's trying to land major deals, and he's a buffoon, but also with the hierarchy of the ticket class. There's some poking and prodding, but Sholom Aleichem mostly pokes and prods in every direction. He's not like an you can't pigeonhole him as Marxist, but he's going to use Marxist critique of capitalism in this story and in some others. I see that in it as you do. Yes, Carla, and then Judy. Kathy. I'm sorry, I don't know where Carla came from. Kathy, and then Judy.
I also found it kind of interesting that everyone else just, because of the hat, he's not wearing the uniform, but because they see the hat, they just like give way to him. It's like, what does that say about them? I mean, it's like, it's so easily just to let someone else come in and take over. Just because he's got the
Could you
hat.
repeat what
She said what was stunning is how powerful the hat was, and how everyone moved out of the way and bowed to it. And what does that say about people? Judy.
I just want to make a comment about the humor, about the relationship between the husband and the wife.
Yeah.
Because I found that just really humorous, but also really true.
Honestly, the thing, I've read this story, I think I first encountered it, I was living in Cincinnati, so that would have been about 27 years ago when I first came upon the story. I first heard it orally, actually, from a series that NPR did, Leonard Nimoy produced, which was to bring these Jewish short stories to these Yiddish classics. And so I heard it first, but every time you read it, certain things sort of stick with you. And the thing that sticks with me the most of the story that just makes me giggle when I think about it is without fail. It's just so funny that by writing without fail, those were unnecessary words. he would have just written home for Passover. Without fail, conveyed no extra meaning other than tempting the evil eye, which she's mad about. But mostly she's mad that he paid extra for 2 words that were unnecessary.
Right.
And that, the fact that he was late, second to that. The fact that her husband is now the laughing stock of the town, second to that. What really gets her is that he paid extra for 2 words that were unnecessary. For some reason, that's my biggest takeaway of the story. Like in my mind, like when I think back at the story, my first thing I just chuckle about is the without fail. It's just so funny. It's so funny. And I think about the late, last night, like we were literally out to dinner and I'm watching her order a side dish that I know she's not going to eat. Because we've been married now almost 25 years. I know she's not going to eat it, but she's going to order, and it's driving me crazy, because like this is what it means to live with someone. It's these things that whatever, and it's the same thing. I'm the wife in this story. Like I can't get over that. Joni, you had your hand up next, and we'll come over here to Lean.
Yes, you were talking earlier about it being a conversational style, and
Yeah.
to me, in addition to that, it's a Jewish conversational style that to me is a real gift this morning to be in the room hearing just this way of conveying a story about giving funny names to people, rattlebrain and buttons, and there's expressions that probably got used in our household that I don't hear in Gentile households, like willy-nilly or hatch-mad, or just sort of a silliness that I don't know what your next story is about, but I see it in some Jewish comedians too, that it helps me connect.
Absolutely.
And I love that style.
There is a rhythm to the Jewish dialogue that's here, and there's a sort of a stylistic way that Jews talk, which is different and you can see it here, and you're like, oh, it's older than just my parents.
Yes.
This way of talking.
It's not vanilla.
It's not vanilla. It's delicious and it's fun. It's fun to be among Jews and talk in a Jewish vernacular. Yes.
I was thinking back to the dialogue that the wife was having.
Yeah.
And it comes down to who do you think you are? And that's what the story's about. The
She says
identity.
she's thinking about the wife and her. It's about who do you think you are, and that's another one too. It's about hubris.
Right.
And about, property, and he tries to talk about landed estates and tries to be, and who does he think he is? And she's like, who do you think you are?
Right, about the identity, which is what the story's about.
Yeah. All right, so let's get to last 2 comments because we have another story. Let's do Ellen, let's do Ellen, then Ellen.
Anyway, what was really interesting, I thought, was before this story, you told us the thing about Shalom Aleichem, that he is talking about sad, difficult things, but with such humor. And I was glad you said that before the story, because it enabled me to really pick that up in this story.
So in case you can hear, she says she really sees what I said before the story, is that he uses humor to talk about really sad and deep, difficult things. And look, Fiddler on the Roof is exactly that. It's hysterical. It is a horribly tragic thing, the way they lose all their daughters one by one to the various ways that people lost their kids into this new world and then lost their home. It's like a terribly sad sunrise, sunset is a deeply sad message, but it's a very funny musical as well. That's the Sholom Aleichem way. Elizabeth.
What I liked was the sympathy that he felt towards his main character. That the Sholom shot, he's telling the story, but he always wants to be sure that the listener is differentiating between him and the story he's telling. And I think it shows so much affection on the part of Shalom Aleichem for this poor guy, that all these terrible things happen to. And I think that's, to me, was part of the charm of the story.
I agree. So Shalom Aleichem is above these characters. He's a snooty sophisticate. But he gives us, with great love, Kisrilivka, this fictionalized town that he portrays with such love and Tevya and Sholom Shachna that that you feel the warmth of that love. We'll see that a little bit in the next story too. I'm sorry, we just ran out of time, but there's more good ahead. So, in the course of these 8 sessions, I have asked some of our skilled actors of our congregation who do local theater and reading groups and so forth to be readers. And our first guest reader will be Judith Koziel herself, whom you already met. Oh wait, actually, let me introduce our author, and then we'll call Judith up to read. So our second author is Peretz. Peretz is not as known to us today, and that belies the fact of his extraordinary popularity in his day. 100,000 people attended his funeral. I just want to say this again. 100,000 people descended upon Warsaw to honor and express their love and appreciation of Peretz when he died. He's called often the father of Yiddish literature. Of all of the writers that we're going to read, he was the most popular in terms of published material, number of items sold, number of pieces published. He was from a Polish shtetl, like a small town that was mostly Jewish. He wrote in Hebrew, he wrote in Polish, and he started to write in Yiddish with great frustration because Yiddish fought him. He couldn't write about elevated matters and in the style of the great writers that he knew because the Yiddish just didn't have the words or the ways. So he expanded Yiddish and created a way to write Yiddish as literature, which others, like Sholom Aleichem, would follow. He was a couple years older, but barely than Sholom Aleichem. They were contemporaries. Peretz embraced modernity. He saw the arc of history that the old ways that were going to be ending, and he embraced what was called the Haskalah. This was the Enlightenment, for Jews to read literature, to know the sciences, and to enter into the greater world, and not just our lives of the Jewish law and the Jewish sources. He himself his literature would be hugely impactful on the Jewish social movements of the time, including and especially the story we're going to read today, Bontshe the Silent, or Bontshe Schweig in Yiddish. When he came of age in the 1860s, was a time of tremendous upheaval. So what happened in the 1860s in Europe was that the serfs in the Russian Empire were freed. And 1 year apart, the serfs in Poland were freed. Interestingly, 1 year after that, the slaves in America were freed. So all of this was happening in the middle of the 1860s. And in his time, there was this new world order that was coming about. And the question is, what shape would this new world take? And what was the Jewish place in it? This story, in Bontshe the Silent, will be a rallying cry for the Jews to seize their destiny. It seems that was his intent, but who could ever know author's intent? But once he wrote it, this story that we're about to read became a lightning rod in the Jewish world. while others of his stories may be more popular, more loved, or maybe better for some reason, absolutely none changed Jewish history and shaped minds the way this story did. And it was used repeatedly for that end by others who would capitalize upon it. It is probably the most influential piece of all of the 8 that we're going to be reading in terms of how fiction can affect history. It's this piece. It is amazing. I hope you enjoy and appreciate Bontshe the Silent by Peretz. Our reader is Judith Koziel.
Here on earth, the death of Bontshe made no impression. Try asking who Bontshe was, how he lived, what he died of. Did his heart give out? Did he drop from exhaustion?
All right, we're having a problem. This is sound sensitive, and you're talking in staccato appropriately, and our microphone is not working for it. So what I'm going to suggest is hold it a little closer, and I'll try a different mic. But it'll take me a minute. Yeah, go ahead and just start over. Yeah.
How is this?
It's better, it's better.
Better, okay. So I have to hold it, read it. Okay. Here on earth, the death of Bontshe made no impression. Try asking who Bontshe was, how he lived, what he died of. Did his heart give out? Did he drop from exhaustion? Did he break his back beneath too heavy a load? And no one can give you an answer. For all you know, he might have starved to death. The death of a tram horse would have caused more excitement. It would have been written up in the papers. Hundreds of people would have flocked to see the carcass, or even the place where it lay. But that's only because horses are scarcer than people, billions of people. Bontshe lived and died in silence. Like a shadow, he passed through this world. No wine was drunk at Bontshe's circumcision. No glasses clinked in a toast. No speech to show off his knowledge was given at his bar mitzvah. He lived like a grain of gray sand at the edge of the sea, besides millions of other grains. No one noticed when the wind whirled him off and carried him to the far shore. When Bontshe lived, his feet left.
1 minute. It cut out again?
Yeah.
I wonder, because I just turned this one on, if it made that one cut out. So let's try this one.
While Bontshe lived, his feet left no tracks in the mud. When he died, the wind blew away the wooden sign marking his grave. The grave digger's wife found it some distance away, and she used it to boil potatoes. Do you think that 3 days after Bontshe was dead, anyone knew where he lay? There was not even a gravestone for a future antiquarian to unearth and mouth the name of Bontshe one last time. A shadow, no mind, no heart, preserved his image. Nothing remained of him at all, not a trace. Alone he lived, and alone he died. Were not humanity so noisy, someone might have heard Bontshe's bones as they cracked beneath their burden. Were the world in less of a hurry, someone might have noticed that Bontshe, a fellow member of the human race, had in his lifetime 2 lifeless eyes, a pair of sinkholes for cheeks, and even when no weight bent his back, a head bowed to the ground as if searching for its own grave. Were men as rare as horses, someone would surely have wondered where he had disappeared to. When Bontshe was brought to the hospital, the corner of the cellar he called his home did not remain vacant, because 10 men bid for it at once. When he was taken from the hospital ward to the morgue, 20 sick paupers were candidates for his bed. When he was carried out of the morgue, 40 men killed in the fall of a building were carried in. Think how many others are waiting to share his plot of earth with him, and well may you wonder how long he will rest there in peace. He was born in silence. He lived in silence. He died in silence, and he was buried in a silence greater yet. But that's not how it was in the other world. There, Bontshe's death was an occasion. A blast of the Messiah's horn sounded in all 7 heavens. Bontshe Schweig has passed away. Bontshe Schweig has been summoned to his maker. The most exalted angels with the brightest wings informed each other in mid-flight. A joyous din broke out in paradise. Bontshe Schweig, it doesn't happen every day. Young silver-booted cherubs with diamond-bright eyes and gold filigreed wings ran gaily to greet Bontshe when he came. The flapping of their wings, the patter of their boots, and the merry ripple of laughter from their fresh rosy mouths echoed through the heavens as far as the mercy seat, where God himself soon knew that Bontshe Schweig was on his way. At the gates of heaven stood Father Abraham, his right hand outstretched in cordial welcome, and the most radiance of smiles on his old face. But what was that sound? It was 2 angels wheeling a golden chair into paradise for Bontshe to sit on. And what was that flash? It was a gold crown set with gleaming jewels, all for Bontshe. What? Before the heavenly tribunal even handed down its verdict. That was marveled by the saints, not without envy. Ah, answered the angels, everyone knows that only a formality. The prosecution doesn't have a leg to stand on. The whole business will be over in 5 minutes. You're not dealing with just anyone, you know. When the cherubs raised Bontshe on high and sounded a heavenly fanfare, when Father Abraham reached out to shake his hand like an old friend, when Bontshe heard that a gold crown and chair awaited him in paradise, and that the heavenly prosecutor had no case to present, he behaved exactly as he would have in this world. That is, he was too frightened to speak. His heart skipped a beat. He was sure it must be either a dream or just a mistake. He was accustomed to both. More than once in this world of ours, he dreamed of finding gold in the street, whole treasure chests of it, only to awake as great a beggar as before. More than once some passerby had smiled or said hello, only to turn aside in disgust upon realizing his error. That's how my luck is, Bontshe thought. He was afraid that if he opened his eyes, the dream would vanish and he would find himself in a dark cave full of vermin. He was afraid that if he uttered a sound or moved a limb, he would be recognized at once and whisked away by the devil. He was trembling so hard that he did not hear the cherubs sing his praises or see them dance around him. He did not return Father Abraham's hearty greeting or bid the heavenly tribunal good day when he was ushered in before it. He was scared out of his wits. His fright, moreover, grew even greater when his eyes fell involuntarily on the floor of the courtroom. It was solid alabaster inlaid with diamonds. Just look where I'm standing, he thought, too paralyzed to move. Who knows what rich Jew or rabbi they've mixed me up with? In a minute he'll arrive, and that'll be the end of me. He was too frightened to hear the presiding judge call out, "The case of Bontshe Schreiber," adding to as he handed Bontshe's file to the defense counsel. "You have the floor, but be quick." The whole courtroom seemed to revolve around him. There was a buzzing in his ears. Gradually, he began to make out the counsel's voice, as sweet as a violin. The name Bontshe Schweig, Bontshe Schweig the Silent, the counsel was saying, fit him like a tailored suit. What is he talking about, wondered Bontshe, just as the judge remarked impatiently, "No poetry, please." Not once in his whole life, the counsel for the defense went on, did he complain to God or to a man. Not once did he feel a drop of anger or cast an accusing glance at heaven. Bontshe still understood nothing. Again the brusque voice interrupted, "Oh, you can skip the rhetoric too." Even Job broke down in the end, whereas this man, who suffered even more, stick to the facts, warned the bench. At the age of 8 days, his circumcision was botched by a bungler. Don't need the gory details. Who couldn't even staunch the blood? Proceed. He bore it all in silence, continued the counsel for the defense. Even when at the age of 13, his mother died and her place was taken by a stepmother with the heart of a snake. That does sound like me, marveled Bontshe. No hearsay evidence, snapped the judge. She scrimped on his food. She fed him moldy bread and gristle, while she herself drank coffee with cream in it. Get to the point. She didn't spare him her fingernails, though. His black and blue marks showed through the holes in the old rags she dressed him in. She made him chop wood for her on the coldest days of winter, standing barefoot in the yard. He was too young and weak to wield the axe, which was too dull, to cut the wood, which was too thick to even be cut. He wrenched his arms and froze his feet more times than you can count. But still he kept silent, even before his own father. His father? A drunk, laughed the prosecutor, sending a chill down Bontshe's spine. But he never complained, continued the defense counsel. He hadn't a soul to turn to. No friends, no schoolmates, no school, not one whole item of clothing, not a free second of time. The facts, repeated the bench. He even kept silent when his father, in a drunken fit, took him by the neck one snowy winter night and threw him out of the house. He picked himself out of the snow without a peep and followed his feet where they took him. At no time did he ever say a word. Even when half dead from hunger, he never begged except with his eyes. At last, one dizzy, wet spring evening, he arrived in a great city. He vanished in it like a drop of water in the sea, though not before spending his first night in jail for vagrancy. And still, he kept silent, never asking why or how long. He worked at the meanest jobs and said nothing, and don't think it was easy to even find them. Drenched in his own sweat, doubled over beneath more than a man can carry, his stomach gnawed by hunger, he kept silent. Spattered with the mud of city streets, spat on by unknown strangers, driven from the sidewalk to stagger in the gutter with his load beside carriages, wagons, and tram cars, looking death in the eye every minute. He kept silent. He never reckoned how many tons he had to carry for each ruble. He kept no track of how often he stumbled and fell. He didn't count the times he had to sweat blood to be paid. Never once did he stop to ask himself why fate was kinder to others. He kept silent. He never even raised his voice to demand his meager wage. Like a beggar, he stood in doorways, glancing up humbly as a dog to its master. Come back later, he would be told, and like a shadow, he was gone, coming back later to beg again for what was his. He said nothing when cheated, nothing when paid with bad money. He kept silent. Why, perhaps they mean me after all, thought Bontshe, taking heart. Once, continued the counsel for the defense after a sip of water, things seemed about to look up. A droshky raced by Bontshe, pulled by runaway horses. Its coachman thrown senseless on the cobblestones, his skull split wide open. Frightened horses foamed at the mouth, sparks shot from under their hooves, their eyes glittered like torches on a dark night, and in his seat cringed a passenger more dead than alive. And it was Bontshe who stopped the horses. The rescued passenger was a generous Jew who rewarded him for his deed. He handed him the dead driver's whip, made him a coachman, found him a wife, and made him a wedding too, and was even thoughtful enough to provide him with a baby boy. And Bontshe kept silent. It certainly sounds like me, thought Bontshe, almost convinced, though he still did not dare look up at the tribunal. He listened as the counsel went on. He kept silent when his benefactor went bankrupt without giving him a day's pay. He kept silent when his wife ran off and left him with a little infant. And 15 years later, when the boy was strong enough to throw his father into the street, Bontshe kept silent then too. It's me all right, decided Bontshe, happily. He even kept silent in the hospital, the one place where a man can scream. He kept silent when the doctor wouldn't examine him without half a ruble in advance, and when the orderly wanted 5 kopecks just to change his dirty sheets. He kept silent as he lay dying. He kept silent when he died. Not one word against God, not one word against man. The defense rests. Once again, Bontshe trembled all over. He knew that the defense was followed by the prosecution. Who could tell what the prosecution might say? Bontshe himself hardly remembered his own life. Back on earth, each minute had obliterated the one before. The counsel for the defense had reminded him of many forgotten things. What might he learn now from the prosecution? Gentlemen! The voice of the prosecutor was sharp and piercing. At once, however, it broke off. Gentlemen! It resumed, although more softly, only to break off again. When it spoke a third time, it was almost tender. Gentlemen, it said, he kept silent. I will do the same. There was a hush. Then from the bench, another voice spoke tenderly, tremulously too. Bontshe, Bontshe, my child, it said in harp-like tones, my own dearest Bontshe. Bontshe felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to open his eyes at last, but his tears had sealed them shut. Never had he known that tears could be so sweet. My child, my Bontshe, not once since the death of his mother had he been spoken to like that. My child, continued the judge, you have suffered all in silence. There is not an unbroken bone in your body, not a corner of your soul that has not bled. And you have kept silent. There, in the world below, no one appreciated you. You yourself never knew that you had cried walls of Jericho. You never knew what powers lay within you. There, in the world of deceit, your silence went unrewarded. Here, in the world of truth, it will be given its full due. The heavenly tribunal can pass no judgment on you. It is not for us to determine your portion of paradise. Take what you want. It is yours, all yours. Bontshe looked up for the first time. His eyes were blinded by rays of light that streamed at him from all over. Everything glittered, glistened, blazed with light. The walls, the benches, the angels, the judges. So many angels. He cast his dazed eyes down again. Truly, he asked, happy but abashed. Why, of course, the judge said. Of course. I tell you, it's all yours. All heaven belongs to you. Ask for anything you wish. You can choose what you like. Truly, asked Bontshe again, a little bit surer of himself. Truly, 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 clamored the heavenly host. Well then, smiled Bontshe, what I'd like most of all is a warm roll with fresh butter every morning. The judges and the angels hung their heads in shame. The prosecutor laughed.
Thank you, Judah.
Thank you, Judah. We are going to take a few moments now, just in silence, just to again absorb on our own this story before we start hearing from others. Okay, we open up the floor now. Let's go with Annie first, and then Renee.
I think that the whole story is summed up in one sentence. You never knew what powers lay within you.
She says the whole story is summed up in one sentence. You never knew the powers that lay within you. I'll tell you, as a literary device, that was so powerful. This story wrecks me, I have to confess. This story wrecked me when I first encountered it and has wrecked me on numerous occasions that I've had the chance to read it again. But one of the things that just you marvel at its, sort of craft is the reality of this world where he was ignored and unnoticed, and how he was appreciated in the next world, and the alternate realities of, that could coexist at the same moment. It can be very true, even though this is fiction. Whether someone is deemed worthless out in the world, but at home they're beloved, or the opposite. They're appreciated here, but not, where they are, or something. But he takes it to, of course, the most extraordinary of extremes. Renee, and then Adrian.
I found this to be a most painful story. It seemed to me, even though I know it was written in the 19th century, it was a precursor to the Holocaust when the Jews silently went to their deaths. And and nobody, there were some who rebelled, but mostly millions walked quietly without complaining. And then at the bottom of page 151, it says, there in the world of deceit, your silence went unrewarded. Here in the world of truth, it will be given its full due. It sounds like Europe and Israel. That before, when you were silent, you suffered. When you spoke up, you had a chance for a good life.
I want to repeat so people can hear. In fact, I think I might just pass the microphone around. What she said, in fact, I'm going to go ahead and hand it to her, and then I'm going to get a second microphone as well, because we got fresh batteries. The other one, the batteries ran out, but we got fresh batteries for it. Do you mind repeating? Yeah, or just the highlight.
So I said I found this to be an incredibly painful story, and even though I know that it was written in the 19th century, it reminded me of the Jews in Europe who went silently to their doom, millions and millions of them. And I think that the possibilities were summed up at the bottom of page 151, where it said, there in the world of deceit, your silence went unrewarded. Here in the world of truth, it will be given its full due. And you could take from it and make it that one was Europe, where the Jews really had no voice, and the other was Israel, where they spoke up and they fought for their rights.
Thank you.
Two things, and I'm not sure if this was said because I couldn't really hear. The first is that he could not see himself as anything but unimportant.
Hold it closer, please.
He could not see himself as anything as unimportant, much like the story that we read by Shalom Aleichem. He could not see himself as deserving of anything or possibly be seen as important. So I found the link between those two. And then at the very end, he's still humble, but now he's more than humble, he's righteous. And the judges and the angels are shamed, I think, because they see before them someone who is truly righteous when they might have considered themselves to be the righteous.
And please pass it forward to Helene.
I told this story to religious school students about 50 years ago, and I have never forgotten that last thing about a roll, a warm roll with butter for breakfast. We discussed a little bit about that there were people out there who needed help but never asked for it. It's just something that never left my mind.
Ellen Zippin, and then I
have to admit the story made me very uneasy. I was not happy with him not ever speaking up. I think that his life could have been infinitely better, and he could have made life better for people around him. I don't think just sitting back and letting anything bad happen to you without trying to change it is, to me, that's not my definition of righteous.
You know, I have is this on?
Is this on? Yeah. I have a different take. You were saying in the 1860s the serfs were liberated and so on. To me, it was a story of the Jews or any slaves. It's a story of the Jews or any slaves who are looked upon as nothing, and in heaven, everybody's equal. And it just seems that in the time, the Jews were what they were, but they were never recognized as being anything but subservient to everyone else. And when the time came for reckoning, they were just like everyone else. And all they wanted was the simple things of life, like a roll with butter.
And can you please hand it to Jay, and then we're going to go back 1, 2, 3 in a line.
To me, you can't take the story literally. You have to see it as possibly a metaphor between the old world that the Jews lived in and the New World where Jews had rights and were equal. So I saw it as a metaphor for what changes were taking place in society.
I was curious about that, Rabbi. You said it was a culturally changing story, and I would like to know, is that, the gentleman right in front of me, is that what you were referring to?
Yes.
Yes, but and please tell us your name so we can.
George Freed.
Hi, George, and welcome.
Hi, thank you. Way before the Holocaust, Bialik, in talking about Kishinev, was very angry at the entire Jewish population for being silent there and just laying down and doing nothing. Also, I think Wiesel wrote a book called The Jews of Silence, talking about, I believe it was Russian Jews.
So let's address this in its context. Well, actually, let me go with Esther.
And one other quick thing.
Yeah.
The thought of getting your right, what you're entitled to in the next world rather than this world, to me is much more of a Christian mentality, because the way I understand Judaism, you live in this world and you do whatever you can in this world, not the next world.
So your understanding of Judaism is because you are already a Haskalah enlightened Jew. That was not the understanding of Judaism for thousands of years of our tradition, which is the more important world was the world to come. That's the world of eternity. Our life on earth is but a short span. The afterlife, the Olam Haba, was ultimately, and everything he's describing here, he grew up traditionally. In fact, he was a real bright star in his, yeshiva and everything, because he's brilliant. Everything he's describing is part of the Jewish lore of expectation, of judgment, and the angels, and the prosecution, and the witnesses, and everything, the mercy chair, which nowadays you only hear Christians talking about, but that Jews were consumed with the world to come for generation upon generation, just not our generation.
When did that stop, Rabbi?
That stopped really with modernity and the embrace of philosophy and logic and focusing more on what we can perceive, and gave primacy with humanism, which, by the way, Peretz was a major humanist and a universalist, but also about individual rights and standing up for your rights. That sense of seizing the now put Jews with an emphasis on this world and not waiting for the next world. Reform Judaism rejected messianism, waiting for a Messiah to come and save the day. Instead, we are supposed to build our messianic age. That's all part and parcel of the same change that came about with the Haskalah and modernity. So, yes, let's go with Esther, who had your hand up before.
I'm gonna speak loud.
No, you got to put the microphone.
Maybe his germs on. Okay. I wonder if Peretz was an influence on Theodor Herzl, because Peretz was saying, if this is all you want is a roll and butter, that's not enough. We have to rise up and want more.
Yes. She asked if Peretz was an influence on Herzl. Well, I can't say that Herzl wrote that. It was Peretz that. Peretz was the principal rallier of all Jewish movements, and this story specifically was. In fact, we're talking about whatever author's intent was. Author's intent we can get from his other writings and interviews. That he intended it for Jews to rise up and rally and not, and demand better for themselves. And he, in some of his commentaries, suggests that even when he wasn't writing about this story specifically, but writing about, anyway, I won't go there. But what it meant to the people, how the people understood it, was that we have been meek and silent and accepting for too long, and it's time now to stand up for our rights and shape a better future and think bigger and demand more. That's how the Jewish world read this. In fact, it became the practice that the conventions of the Bundes, which was the Jewish socialist movement, the biggest of all the movements, it was bigger than Zionism, it was bigger than Jewish communism, the biggest movement were the Bundes. They began their sessions with a recitation of this story. It became like their anthem, or like, We Shall Overcome was in 60s movements, like you couldn't have a gathering without singing that song. You didn't have a Bundes gathering without a recitation or an allusion or excerpts of this story. That's how it became and was understood by our people. And like I said, it was such a lightning bolt for the Jews now to be awakened and to seek greater things. And that would have to include Zionism too, which at the time was one of the smaller movements, but over time would have the most lasting impact. The Bundes are mostly gone, the Jewish communists are mostly gone, and so forth, but Zionism lives on. But this is, and stay tuned for next week when we read Sholom Aleichem's Dreyfus in Kazrilivka, because of course Dreyfus affair was what bore into Zionism. Sholom Aleichem will address the same issue, which is the world's disappointment, where we saw the arc of history going one way, and it looks like it doesn't move forward. It sometimes goes backwards. So that is in store for us next week. We get to look forward to. Yes.
I was really curious about the very last sentence.
Yes.
Clearly the whole story is sort of an obvious metaphor, but who were the people that were ashamed? When somebody feels shame, that means they could have done something. So these were not passive angels, and it sort of infers that there's some higher power, whether it's religious or governmental, that this is being addressed to.
The prosecutor laughs.
Yeah, and the prosecutor laughs.
Yeah.
That was the most interesting and confusing part.
I like that he left it vague. In fact, there's another translation that printed clearer that I didn't use. This is a poor photocopy of a photocopy, I'm afraid. Because the other translation said they were ashamed of his meekness and da-da-da, like it gave the interpretation in the translation. I'm like, no, don't ruin it by stating it too obviously. By him not saying why they were ashamed really gives you pause to really reflect, like how did they take this, that he only asked for the bread and butter? And why were they ashamed? Why didn't they appreciate that as much as they appreciated everything else about him?
Or did they have any influence on his life that led to his living that life? It just gave them more participation. They weren't passive,
And what did they expect? Like, he didn't say anything his whole life, and they exalt him for it. Well, why were they ashamed now that he just acted the same way? It's, yes?
Were they ashamed of him or ashamed of themselves?
Well,
I don't know.
that's the question.
Or ashamed of the world, like, that is this way. Yeah, I don't know. Yes, Judith?
I read it a few times, obviously, and so I had a lot of different thoughts, but where is the Jewish role of caring for somebody who was so damaged as a youth, so ignored? I mean, maybe this is the therapist part of me, but this kid from his bris on was given no recognition, and what you learn from that is that you probably don't deserve anymore. But the other part is,
I thought they were ashamed because they were so focused on the gold and the inlays and the diamonds and the thrones. And here this man who and they were supposed to be holy, and here this man only wants, bread and butter. So it was two interesting things for me.
All right, well, let me close up the discussion on this, because clearly this room is not of one interpretation on the story, and our sympathy for the protagonist is still strong. Like, we're not ashamed of him. Yet at the same time, we can understand the Jews who wanted to seek more and build and have a greater share in this world. I find it interesting that I believe, I'll share which camp I'm on, I believe his intent is that, we can't be the Bontshes. Peretz says, we have to fight for more. But it's interesting how tender he is to Bontshe. He doesn't mock Bontshe. He does in the setup, but his writing about him throughout is so laudatory that does stick with you, even though he does that twist at the end. And I want to say, Peretz is a deviant SOB as a writer. Like, Sholom Aleichem is like, wink, wink, we're in this together, like when he writes, that's a great line in the story we just read on account of Hat, when he says, and I had nothing to do with it. I'm passing on this story as it's told. I had nothing to do with it. I mean, everybody's laughing with him. We all know he wrote it, but the fact that he says, this character speaking in the first person, I had nothing to do with it. I heard it from this stationary guy. Like, it's just funny, and we're all in it together. But Peretz doesn't write that way. He writes going this way, and then he pulls, the carpet out from under you and devastates you. And he's mean to us that way. And I still somehow like him more. He's very, very clever. But he's not without his sentimentality. So that's what's interesting. He seems to love Bontshe, even though he's saying we shouldn't be Bontshe anymore. If you like Peretz, I'll suggest, your next story is one that you're probably familiar with or heard, because I know I've told it at our family service on Rosh Hashanah more than once. And that's If Not Higher. Peretz's story about the mysterious rabbi who disappears every year on Yom Kippur, and one particular Litvak, who's a rationalist, who decides to solve the mystery and find where the rabbi goes to, because the legend is he ascends to heaven every year on Yom Kippur and then comes back. So that is If Not Higher. In fact, why don't I just send it by email to everybody, because it won't be in our series. But if you want to read another one, that would be the next one I'd recommend. But that one's very sentimental, and it pokes fun of the rationalists for not dreaming enough, and not being, sort of open enough to the good. So that's an interesting story. But ultimately, I want to come back to one comment that Renee said, which is the timelessness of the story. He wrote it in its moment, but Rini read it in a different moment, the Holocaust, and I'm sorry, George said the same thing. It somehow works in any era. And one of the most interesting connotations is, during McCarthyism, that Jews were overwhelmingly targeted and blacklisted. And a bunch of Jewish artists of Broadway and screenwriters and so forth, they came together and almost in a protest put on and created a Broadway show, and among the things that they put on to feature was this story. So in 1950s America, it spoke to that persecuted group that they chose this story to put on.
It's available on YouTube. It's called the Stories of Shalom. It's called The World of Shalom Aleichem.
And
it's 3 stories.
Yeah.
And Jack Guilford plays Bontshe.
It's amazing. Yeah, yeah.
So.
It was done in 1953, smack in the middle of the McCarthy era.
Yeah. So it speaks anew in different contexts in new generations. But it's interesting. Its point is also eternal. In Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, the most famous quote, from Cassius is, to Brutus is, the fault is not in the stars, but in ourselves, right? But let me read the entire quote, the full verse. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves that we are underlings. That we are underlings is what he's saying. That we can't blame the circumstances. We have to change ourselves in order to come out from under the foot of Caesar. We, need to be self-actualized and take what's ours. And it seems that that's what Peretz wanted the world to do, the Jewish world, and used this story as a vehicle. And I will point out, we talk about this with the stories of the Torah, we talk about this with the stories of the Mishnah, of the Midrash, that narrative is so much more powerful than prose, than argument. Telling a story not only makes your point stronger, but carries the emotion and gets your audience to follow, much more powerful than making a good argument. And our, ancestors who wrote the Bible understood that. Our ancestors who wrote the Midrash understood that. Peretz and Sholom Aleichem understood that too, and chose fiction to influence their entire generation. And not just theirs, but now ours too. Friends, that closes today's session.